The crumpled bill trembled in my hands as my mother-in-law's venomous words echoed through the elegant dining room. "You owe me $50,000 for raising the man you married." Tears threatened to spill onto the pristine white tablecloth as I stared at the itemized list she'd presented with the same confidence as a seasoned accountant. How did a simple Sunday dinner turn into emotional extortion? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across her meticulously crafted invoice, which listed everything from Marcus's first-grade tuition to his college graduation ceremony outfit. But let me start from the beginning, because 6 months ago, I never imagined I'd be blackmailed by the woman who was supposed to be my second mother. My name is Emma Chen, and I used to believe that hard work and determination were enough to overcome any obstacle life threw my way. Growing up in a bustling neighborhood in Seattle, I watched my immigrant parents pour their hearts into our small noodle shop, Lucky Dragon, working 16-hour days to give me and my siblings a shot at the American dream. The rich aroma of spices and the steady rhythm of chopping vegetables became the soundtrack of my childhood, while the tiny apartment above the restaurant served as both our home and a daily reminder of their sacrifice. My father's weathered hands and my mother's perpetual flour-dusted apron taught me the value of every dollar earned and the importance of financial independence. By 28, I had transformed their lessons into my own version of success, turning my passion for graphic design into a thriving freelance business. My home office, a converted sunroom in my cozy Capitol Hill apartment, became my sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in natural light that danced across my dual monitors, while carefully arranged potted succulents and inspiration boards created the perfect environment for creativity to flourish. The gentle hum of the city below and the occasional whir of my espresso machine provided a soothing backdrop to my daily routine. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt both predictable and satisfying. Monday through Friday, I'd wake up at 6, brew my favorite, jasmine tea in the handmade ceramic mug my sister had given me for Christmas, and dive into client projects before most of the city stirred awake. My regulars included an eclectic mix of local restaurants seeking menu redesigns, ambitious tech startups in need of brand identities, and occasionally larger corporations hunting for fresh perspectives on their visual storytelling. Each project brought its own challenges and rewards, and I took pride in knowing that my work helped other dreamers tell their stories. The wall above my desk displayed my most memorable projects. The logo for a women's shelter that had brought tears to the director's eyes, the branding for a sustainable coffee shop that had become a local sensation, and the advertisement campaign that had helped a family-owned bookstore survive the pandemic. These weren't just designs. They were testaments to the power of visual communication and reminders of why I'd chosen this path. Everything changed the day I met Marcus Wright at the Creative Hub, a local co-working space I occasionally used when cabin fever set in or when I needed to escape the isolation of working from home. The converted warehouse space buzzed with the energy of entrepreneurs and freelancers, its exposed brick walls and industrial lighting creating an atmosphere of creative possibility. Marcus stood out from the usual crowd, not because of his smart, casual attire or his striking features, but because of the intense frustration evident in his expression as he stared at his laptop screen, repeatedly running his hands through his dark curls. "Excuse me," he called out, catching my eye as I passed his desk, my third cup of tea in hand. "You're Emma Chen, right? I've seen your work around the space. The mural in the conference room is yours, isn't it?" I nodded, surprised he had made the connection. The mural, a complex geometric design incorporating elements of both Eastern and Western art, had been my gift to the hub after they'd helped me land my first major client. "That's me. Everything okay? You seem troubled." Marcus laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to fill the space between us with unexpected comfort. "That obvious, huh? I'm trying to design a logo for my new psychology practice, but everything..." I create looks like it belongs on a child's birthday card or a bad 90s website. I'm starting to think I should stick to analyzing dreams rather than creating designs. Looking over his shoulder, I bit back a smile. The screen showed what appeared to be a misshapen brain surrounded by rainbow-colored stars, with Comic Sans. Text that read, "Right mind, right time." It was, without a doubt, one of the most endearingly terrible designs I'd ever seen. "It's unique," I offered diplomatically, trying to find something positive to say about the visual catastrophe before me. "It's absolutely horrible," he groaned, closing the laptop with a decisive click. I should stick to helping people with their problems and leave the artistic stuff to professionals who actually know what they're doing. He extended his hand, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "I'm Marcus, by the way, Marcus Wright, and I'm in desperate need of both professional help and possibly a strong drink." That chance encounter turned into a 3-hour conversation over coffee at the Hub's artisanal cafe, where mismatched vintage furniture and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans created the perfect backdrop for unexpected connections. Marcus, I learned, was a clinical psychologist who had recently decided to open his own practice after years of working at a large medical center. His passion became evident as he spoke about his dreams of making mental health care more accessible to underserved communities, particularly focusing on first-generation immigrants and their families. Little did I know that this charming man with ambitious dreams would lead me to Victoria Wright, a woman whose definition of maternal love came with a literal price tag, and whose actions would soon force me to question everything I thought I knew about family, success, and the true cost of happiness. But isn't that always the way? We walk into storms thinking they're just spring showers, only to find ourselves in the middle of a hurricane, holding an umbrella against a force of nature that threatens to sweep away everything we've built. That first coffee meeting with Marcus sparked something neither of us could have predicted. As autumn leaves painted Seattle's streets in shades of amber and gold, our conversation flowed effortlessly from professional aspirations to personal histories. He spoke about growing up in Boston's Jamaica Plain neighborhood, raised by a mother who worked as a high school principal, her iron will shaping both the minds of hundreds of students and her only son's destiny. The warmth in his voice when he talked about his mother would later seem tragically ironic. "My mother has this saying," Marcus shared, stirring his third cup of coffee. "Excellence isn't a choice, it's a right family tradition. She used to write it on my lunch bags every day until I begged her to stop in high school." He chuckled, but I caught a fleeting shadow cross his face. Sometimes I wonder if I opened my own practice just to prove I could meet that standard. The Creative Hub's cafe had emptied as afternoon stretched into evening, the golden hour light streaming through the industrial windows casting long shadows across our table. The barista had started stacking chairs, shooting us meaningful glances, but neither of us was ready to end the conversation. "What about your family?" Marcus asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "How did they react when you chose graphic design over the family business?" I traced the rim of my empty teacup, remembering the tense family dinners and lengthy discussions. My parents didn't understand at first. In their minds, they'd worked themselves to the bone so I could become a doctor or lawyer, something stable. The idea of their daughter becoming an artist? I shook my head, smiling at the memory. My father didn't speak to me for 2 weeks when I switched my major from pre-med to art. But they came around? Marcus's question carried a weight I wouldn't understand until much later. They did, eventually. The turning point was when I redesigned the Lucky Dragon's menu and branding. Business increased by 30% in the first month. Suddenly, my father saw that art could have practical value. I pulled out my phone, showing him pictures of the restaurant's transformation. Now my mom brags about her artist daughter to anyone who'll listen. Marcus studied the before and after photos, his expression thoughtful. You have a gift for bringing out the soul of a place while keeping it accessible. That's exactly what my practice needs. He hesitated, then added with a playful smile. Though I should probably warn you, if you help me with my branding, You might have to meet my mother sooner rather than later. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She likes to approve things. If only I'd recognized that statement. For the red flag it was. Instead, I found myself charmed by his self-deprecating humor and genuine passion for his work. As the cafe staff began turning off lights, we reluctantly gathered our things, neither wanting the evening to end. Outside, Seattle's autumn chill had settled in, the streetlights creating halos in the light mist. Marcus insisted on walking, me to my car, and as we navigated the puddle-dotted sidewalks, our conversation turned to childhood dreams and future hopes. I always wanted to combine traditional therapy with alternative approaches, he explained, his breath visible in the cool air. Art therapy, meditation, cultural healing practices. My mother thinks it's too experimental, but I've seen how traditional Western therapy doesn't always resonate with immigrant families. That's actually brilliant, I responded, thinking of my own parents' skepticism toward mental health care. My mom still thinks meditation is just fancy napping. We both laughed, the sound echoing off the brick buildings. When we reached my car, a restored vintage Volkswagen Beetle that I'd painted with delicate cherry blossoms, Marcus paused, looking suddenly nervous. "Listen, Emma," he began, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I would come to recognize as his tell when he was stepping out of his comfort zone. "I know this started as a potential business discussion, but would you maybe want to get dinner sometime? Completely separate from any logo design talks?" The streetlight above cast a warm glow, highlighting the hopeful expression on his face. In that moment, he looked more like an earnest teenager than a successful psychologist. It was endearing, and before I could overthink it, I heard myself saying yes. "Great!" His face lit up with genuine joy. Though I should mention, my mother might Google you. She does that with everyone I date. But don't worry, she's mostly harmless. Another warning sign I missed, wrapped in a charming package of honesty and humor. As I drove home that night, my mind was filled with possibilities of both professional collaboration and personal connection. I didn't know that Victoria Wright was already typing my name into search engines, building a dossier on the woman who dared to enter her son's life without proper vetting. The next morning, I woke to an email from Marcus. He'd attached his terrible logo attempt with a subject line that read, "Evidence that I desperately need professional help," of the graphic design variety. Below it was a dinner invitation for Friday night at Canlis, one of Seattle's most prestigious restaurants. It was a bold choice for a first date, and later I would understand why. It was the kind of place Victoria Wright would approve of, the kind of place that matched her vision of her son's social status. I spent far too long crafting my reply, trying to strike the perfect balance between professional and personal. Finally, I settled on, "Your logo is a cry for help I can't ignore. Dinner sounds lovely, though I should warn you, I'm much better at designing logos than living up to mother's expectations." I meant it as a joke. I didn't realize it was actually a prophecy. Our first dinner at Canlis set the tone for our blossoming relationship. The restaurant perched above Lake Union like a glittering jewel box, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Seattle's twinkling skyline. Marcus had reserved a corner table, and as the maitre d' led us through the elegant space, I felt simultaneously out of place and oddly at home, much like how I'd come to feel in Marcus's world. "I hope this isn't too much for a first date," Marcus said, pulling out my chair. "My mother always says important moments deserve proper settings." He paused, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. Not that I let her dictate my dating life. Of course. The waiter appeared with a bottle of champagne I hadn't seen Marcus order. "Compliments of Mrs. Wright," he announced, presenting the label for approval. It was a vintage Bollinger, the kind of champagne I'd only read about in magazines. Marcus's face flickered with something between embarrassment and resignation. I should have known, he muttered, then turned to me with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry. I mentioned our date to her and, well, she has a way of inserting herself into situations. We don't have to drink it. But I was already laughing, the absurdity of the situation breaking through any lingering first date tension. Your mother sent champagne to our first date? That's either incredibly sweet or terrifyingly presumptuous. Maybe both? I raised an eyebrow. Does she do this often? Marcus relaxed visibly, letting out a relieved chuckle. Honestly, you're the first date she's ever sent champagne to. I'm not sure if that's a good sign or if we should be worried. As the waiter poured the champagne, its golden bubbles catching the candlelight, Marcus and I fell into easy conversation. He told me about his latest therapy sessions, speaking passionately about helping first-generation college students navigate cultural expectations and personal dreams. I shared stories about my recent projects, including a challenging rebrand for a traditional Chinese medicine clinic that needed to appeal to both elderly immigrants and young professionals. That's exactly the kind of balance I'm trying to strike with my practice, Marcus said, leaning forward enthusiastically. How do you maintain cultural authenticity while making it accessible to a broader audience? Our discussion flowed as smoothly as the champagne, touching on everything from our shared love of fusion cuisine to our complicated relationships with cultural identity. The food arrived. Delicate plates of Pacific Northwest cuisine that looked more like art than dinner. But we were too engrossed in conversation to properly appreciate the culinary masterpieces. My mother wanted me to become a surgeon, Marcus confessed over dessert, a deconstructed apple pie that would have confused my traditional parents. When I chose psychology, instead, she didn't speak to me for a month. Now she introduces me as my son, the doctor, conveniently leaving out the type of doctor I am. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. At least she's trying. My parents still introduce me as our daughter, the computer drawer. The evening ended with a walk along the lake, the October air crisp but not yet bitter. Marcus draped his jacket over my shoulders without prompting, and the gesture felt natural, unforced. As we strolled, our conversation turned to childhood memories and future dreams. I have this vision, I said, watching a seaplane land on the darkened lake, of combining traditional Asian art elements with modern design principles, something that bridges worlds, like what you're doing with your practice. Marcus stopped, walking, turning to face me. You know what's remarkable? You don't just design things, you understand the stories behind them, the people behind them. He paused, his expression serious. I'd really like to kiss you now, if that's okay. The kiss was gentle, tentative, perfect. Against the backdrop of Seattle's glittering skyline, it felt like a scene from a movie. Though I didn't realize then that Victoria Wright was already writing her own script for our relationship's ending. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We'd meet for coffee at the Creative Hub, where I'd work on his practice's branding while he caught up on patient notes. Sometimes he'd bring lunch from Lucky Dragon, having charmed my parents during an impromptu visit. My father, initially skeptical of the head doctor, was won over when Marcus spoke passionately about mental health stigma in Asian communities. Your young man understands respect, my mother declared one evening as I helped her close the restaurant. But his mother, she called today, asked many questions about our family background. I nearly dropped the stack of plates I was carrying. Victoria called here? What did she want to know? My mother shrugged, but her expression was concerned. Many things. Our business, your education, if we own property. Very thorough questions. She paused, wiping down the counter with extra vigor. Be careful, Emma. Some people measure love in dollar signs. I dismissed her concerns, too caught up in the joy of new love to see the warning signs. Marcus and I continued growing closer, sharing quiet evenings in my apartment where I taught him to make dumplings, or spending weekends exploring Seattle's hidden art galleries and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. But Victoria's presence lingered like a shadow at the edges of our happiness. She sent Marcus daily articles about successful power couples, made pointed comments about the importance of marrying within one's social circle, and somehow always managed to steer conversations toward financial matters. One rainy Sunday afternoon, as Marcus and I cuddled on my couch watching old movies, his phone buzzed with yet another message from his mother. His whole body tensed as he read it. "She wants us to come to dinner next week," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "at her house on Mercer Island. She says it's time we had a proper family discussion about our future." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Our future? We've only been dating for 2 months. Marcus pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my temple. "We don't have to go if you're not comfortable. My mother can be intense about these things." But I was young and in love, confident that any family tensions could be overcome with enough patience and understanding. "No, we should go. She's your mother. How bad could it be?" Those words would come back to haunt me, but for now, they were just another step in what felt like a perfect love story. Little did I know that Victoria Wright's dinner invitation wasn't just about getting to know her son's girlfriend. It was the opening move in a carefully planned game where love and money were merely pieces on her chessboard. Victoria Wright's house on Mercer Island wasn't just a home, it was a statement. The modernist mansion rose from manicured gardens like a glass and steel monument to success, its clean lines and expansive windows reflecting the waters of Lake Washington. As Marcus guided his car up the curved driveway, I clutched the bottle of wine I'd brought, a carefully selected vintage from my father's private collection, and tried to quiet the butterflies in my stomach. "Remember," Marcus said, squeezing my hand, "she's going to try to impress you, then intimidate you, probably in that order. It's her standard operating procedure. Just be yourself. That's more than enough." He hesitated, then added, "Though, maybe don't mention that mural you painted at the anarchist bookstore." Before I could respond, the front door swung open, revealing Victoria Wright in all her glory. She stood like a queen at court, dressed in a tailored Chanel suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her smile held all the warmth of an Arctic winter. "Marcus, darling," she trilled, air-kissing his cheeks. Her eyes slid to me, assessment clear in their pale blue depths. "And Emma, at last. I was beginning to think my son was keeping you from me deliberately." The foyer opened into a great room that belonged in an architectural magazine. Abstract paintings I recognized as original Rothkos adorned the walls, their moody colors reflecting in the polished marble floors. A baby grand piano commanded one corner, though its pristine condition suggested it was more decorative than functional. "What a lovely home," I offered, presenting the wine. "This is from my father's collection. He imports select vintages from small Chinese vineyards." Victoria accepted the bottle with perfectly manicured fingers, examining the label. "How exotic. Huang, our chef, can always use cooking wine. Now, shall we have drinks on the terrace?" The sunset is particularly magnificent this evening. The terrace, it turned out, was larger than my entire apartment. Comfortable modern furniture was arranged around a fire pit that danced with blue flames, and the view stretched across the lake to the Seattle skyline. A uniformed server appeared silently with a tray of cocktails. "Manhattan for you, Marcus," Victoria directed. "And for Emma. Well, I wasn't sure of your preferences. Perhaps a simple white wine?" "A Manhattan would be lovely, actually," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "It's my grandfather's favorite. He taught me to appreciate a well-crafted cocktail." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance at having her assumptions challenged. She recovered quickly, gesturing for the server to adjust the order. "Tell me, Emma," she began, settling into a designer lounge chair. "Marcus mentions you're some sort of artist?" "I'm a graphic designer," I corrected gently. "I run my own business, specializing in branding and corporate identity design. In fact, I'm currently working on the branding for Marcus's new practice." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Oh? I wasn't aware Marcus was paying for professional design services. Though I suppose mixing business with pleasure can be interesting." "Actually, Mother," Marcus interjected, "Emma's one of the most sought-after designers in Seattle. Her waiting list for new clients is 3 months long." "How enterprising," Victoria murmured, in a tone that suggested street vendors were enterprising. "And your parents? Marcus mentioned something about a restaurant?" I straightened my spine, pride replacing nervousness. "My parents own Lucky Dragon. It's been a Seattle institution for 20 years. We were featured in Food and Wine last spring for our innovative take on traditional Chinese cuisine." "A restaurant," Victoria repeated, as if testing the word's taste, and finding it bitter. "And they encouraged your artistic pursuits?" "They taught me that success comes in many forms," I replied, "and that true wealth isn't always measured in dollars." The server reappeared with our Manhattans, providing a momentary reprieve from Victoria's subtle interrogation. As I sipped the perfectly mixed cocktail, Victoria shifted her attention to Marcus. "Darling, have you given any more thought to Dr. Morrison's offer? Having your practice associated with Seattle Grace would provide such stability." Marcus tensed beside me. "Mother, we've discussed this. I want to build something of my own. Something that serves communities that traditional practices often overlook." Yes, your mission to save the world one therapy session at a time." Victoria's laugh tinkled like ice in a crystal glass. "But surely you must think about the future, about providing the kind of life that certain people might expect." The implication hung in the air like heavy perfume. Before either of us could respond, a different server appeared to announce dinner was served. The dining room was a study in calculated intimidation. The table, an expanse of dark wood that could seat 20, was set for 3 with what appeared to be antique Limoges china. Crystal stemware caught the light from a chandelier that probably cost more than my annual income. As we took our seats, Victoria turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you don't mind, but I asked Huang to prepare a traditional Western menu tonight. I wasn't sure if you'd be comfortable with anything too adventurous." I bit back a laugh at the irony. My parents' restaurant was known for its fusion cuisine, and I'd grown up eating everything from sea urchin to beef tartare. "How thoughtful. Though I hope you'll let me cook for you sometime. My 5-spice duck breast won a local culinary competition last year." The first course arrived, a delicate consommé that spoke of hours of preparation. As we ate, Victoria steered the conversation through a carefully choreographed dance of probing questions and subtle jabs, all delivered with impeccable social grace. "And where did you attend university, Emma?" "Marcus was top of his class at Harvard. You know, Seattle University," I replied, noting how her smile tightened. "I was offered a full scholarship to RISD, but I wanted to stay close to help with the restaurant." "How pragmatic," Victoria said, signaling for the wine to be refreshed. "Though one does wonder about the long-term viability of a career in graphics, especially with AI becoming so prevalent." The evening continued in this vein, each course accompanied by a fresh round of subtle deprecation. By the time dessert arrived, a complicated French pastry that looked too perfect to eat, I understood exactly what kind of woman Victoria Wright was, and why Marcus had waited so long to introduce us. As we prepared to leave, Victoria pulled me aside while Marcus retrieved our coats. "Emma, dear," she said, her voice honeyed with false concern. "You seem like a lovely girl, but surely you must understand. Marcus comes from a certain background, with certain expectations. I'd hate to see him compromise his future for a passing infatuation. I met her gaze, refusing to be cowed. With all due respect, Mrs. Wright, I think Marcus is capable of making his own choices about his future, and about who he allows to be part of it. Her smile turned predatory. Oh, my dear, everyone's capable of making choices. The question is whether they're prepared to live with the consequences. As we drove away from the mansion, Marcus apologized profusely for his mother's behavior. But I was quiet, thinking about Victoria's parting words and the calculated look in her eyes. I didn't know it then, but that dinner was just the opening salvo in what would become an increasingly complex war for Marcus's future. A war where love and money would become dangerous weapons in Victoria Wright's arsenal. In the weeks following, that tension-filled dinner at Victoria's mansion, Marcus and I grew closer, almost as if his mother's disapproval had strengthened our resolve. Our relationship deepened through quiet moments and shared dreams, while his practice began taking shape under my creative direction. I'd designed a sophisticated brand identity that married traditional psychological symbols with modern, approachable elements, a perfect reflection of his vision. One crisp November morning, as Seattle's infamous rain drummed against the windows of my apartment, Marcus and I sat surrounded by design mock-ups and takeout containers from Lucky Dragon. He was reviewing the final branding package while I nervously twisted a dumpling wrapper into elaborate shapes. "Emma, this is incredible," he breathed, spreading the materials across my coffee table. The logo I'd created featured an abstract representation of a bridge, its lines flowing into the shape of a brain. The color palette was warm but professional, with touches of gold that added sophistication without ostentation. It's exactly what I envisioned, but better than I could have imagined. I relaxed slightly, setting down the mangled dumpling wrapper. "You're sure? We can still make adjustments if—" Marcus cut me off with a kiss. "It's perfect. Just like you." He pulled back, his expression suddenly serious. "Which is why I want you to let me pay your full rate for this." "We've discussed this," I said firmly. "You're not just a client, Marcus. I want to contribute to your dream." "And you have," he insisted. "But I've seen your standard pricing. This level of work. Emma, it's worth every penny. Please let me do this properly." Before I could argue further, his phone buzzed. Another text from Victoria. His face darkened as he read it. "She wants to see the branding before we finalize. Anything. Says she has contacts in marketing who could review it." I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. Since our dinner, Victoria had been increasingly inserting herself into every aspect of Marcus's practice. She'd sent endless emails about proper medical office aesthetics and maintaining professional standards. "What are you going to tell her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Marcus ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "The truth. That I trust my talented girlfriend's professional judgment more than her country club friend's opinions." He paused, then added softly, "You know she's just trying to maintain control, right? This isn't really about the branding." I nodded, gathering the design materials into a portfolio. "I know. But Marcus, at some point, you'll have to set firm boundaries," he finished. "I know. And I will. Just not today. Not over text." He pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. "Can we just enjoy this moment? Be proud of what we've created together?" Later that afternoon, I met my sister May for coffee at our favorite spot in the International District. The tiny cafe was packed with students from the nearby community college, their laptops competing for space with steaming cups of bubble tea. "So, the Wicked Witch is still trying to sink her claws in?" May asked, stirring her lavender latte. Unlike me, she had no filter when it came to expressing opinions about Victoria Wright. "She's just protective," I defended automatically, then caught myself. Okay, maybe obsessively, manipulatively protective. Yesterday, she sent Marcus a list of suitable office locations in Bellevue. Apparently, his chosen location in the Central District isn't appropriate for someone of his background. May snorted. You mean it's too close to actual people who need help rather than rich housewives with designer depression? May, I exclaimed, but couldn't help laughing. It's not that simple. Victoria. She has this very specific vision of success. In her mind, she's trying to protect Marcus from making mistakes. And you're the mistake? May's eyes narrowed. Emma, you're successful in your own right. Your designs are featured in national magazines. You make more money than most people our age. Why are you letting this woman make you feel small? I traced the condensation on my cup, considering my sister's words. I'm not. At least, I'm trying not to. But sometimes I wonder if she's right. If Marcus and I come from two different worlds. Different worlds? May leaned forward, her voice intense. Emma, our parents came from literally different worlds. Dad was a chef from Guangzhou, Mom was a teacher from Taiwan. They built something beautiful together because they shared the same values, the same dreams. Do you and Marcus share the same dreams? The question hit home. Marcus and I had talked endlessly about our visions for the future, about making mental health care accessible to immigrant communities, about combining our skills to help others tell their stories. Our dreams aligned perfectly. It was only Victoria's version of success that seemed at odds with our plans. That evening, I worked late in my home office, finalizing the last details of Marcus's brand guidelines. My phone chimed with a message, not from Marcus, but from Victoria. My heart skipped as I opened it. Dear Emma, it read, I've taken the liberty of having some colleagues review your design work for Marcus's practice. While adequate for certain demographics, I believe a more established firm might better serve his professional image. I'm happy to make introductions. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered my response. The old Emma might have apologized, might have second-guessed her work, but May's words echoed in my mind. Thank you for your interest, Mrs. Wright, I typed carefully. However, Marcus has approved the final designs, which align perfectly with his vision for his practice. I'm sure your colleagues are very talented, but this project is complete. Her response came almost immediately. I see. I hope you understand that a mother only wants what's best for her child. Sometimes that means protecting them from impulsive decisions. I stared at the screen, understanding the threat implicit in her words. Victoria Wright wasn't just questioning my designs. She was questioning my place in Marcus's life. But as I looked at the brand I'd created, at the perfect synthesis of professionalism and accessibility, I felt a surge of confidence. I understand completely, I replied. And I agree. Marcus deserves the best. That's exactly what I've given him. I turned off my phone before she could respond, focusing instead on the final touches of the project. Each element of the design reflected not just Marcus's professional goals, but our shared values. The belief that help should be accessible, that bridges could be built between communities, that success meant more than just profit margins. Victoria. Wright might have wealth and social connections on her side, but I had something more valuable. A deep understanding of Marcus's dreams and the skills to help bring them to life. As I worked into the night, I realized that this brand wasn't just about building Marcus's practice. It was about building our future, one carefully crafted element at a time. Marcus's practice opened on a rainy Tuesday in December, the kind of day that made Seattle feel like a city painted in watercolors. The office space he'd chosen, a renovated craftsman in the Central District, stood out among the modern developments surrounding it. I'd spent weeks helping him transform the interior into a perfect blend of professional and welcoming, incorporating elements from his brand identity throughout the space. The bridge motif from the logo appeared subtly in the wallpaper design, while warm gold accents added touches of elegance without ostentation. "I can't believe this is really happening," Marcus whispered, standing in the waiting room as morning light filtered through the stained glass windows. His first patient would arrive in an hour, and nervous energy radiated from him in waves. "Everything's perfect, Emma. Absolutely perfect." I squeezed his hand, taking in the space we'd created together. The comfortable seating areas featured locally crafted furniture, while the walls displayed a carefully curated collection of art from diverse Seattle artists. It was exactly what we'd envisioned, a space that felt both professional and deeply personal. "Dr. Wright?" A sharp voice cut through our moment of contentment. Victoria stood in the doorway, imperious in a designer suit, holding what appeared to be a large framed document. "I thought I'd bring this for your office. Every proper medical practice needs credentials displayed." Marcus tensed beside me. "Mother, I told you we weren't expecting you until the evening reception." "Nonsense, darling. I wanted to see how things looked in proper daylight." Her eyes swept the room, lingering disapprovingly on the local artwork. "Though I must say, this is all rather bohemian for a professional practice. My interior decorator could still make some adjustments before word gets out to our social circle." Before Marcus could respond, his office manager Lisa appeared. "Dr. Wright, your first patient is here early. She's quite nervous and wondering if you could see her now." I felt Marcus straighten, his professional demeanor sliding into place. "Of course. Mother, we'll have to continue this later. Emma, would you—" "I'll handle everything," I assured him, watching as he followed Lisa to greet his first patient. This was his moment, and I wasn't about to let Victoria derail it. Left. Alone with Victoria, I braced myself for the inevitable critique. She didn't disappoint. "Really, Emma," she began, setting down the framed credentials with more force than necessary. "I understand you're trying to make a statement here, but this isn't some downtown art gallery. This is a medical practice. What will people think?" "They'll think exactly what Marcus wants them to think," I replied calmly. "That this is a place where they can feel comfortable being themselves, where healing doesn't require pretense." Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Comfortable? My dear, people don't seek therapy to feel comfortable. They seek it because they need help from someone with authority, with credentials. Speaking of which..." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a business card. "Harrison and Wells Design. They're the firm that handles all the branding for Seattle Grace Hospital. I've arranged for them to provide a more suitable redesign package." I felt my face flush with anger, but kept my voice steady. "Marcus's branding is finalized, Mrs. Wright. The website launches tonight and all materials have been approved and printed." "Yes, well, about that." Victoria's smile turned predatory. "I've taken the liberty of speaking with some colleagues on the hospital board. They're quite concerned about Marcus operating independently, especially with such an unconventional approach. They've offered him a position in their psychiatric department, much more prestigious than this little experiment." The implications were clear. Victoria was trying to dismantle everything Marcus and I had built together. But before I could respond, we heard voices from the hallway. Marcus was walking his first patient out, and the young woman was smiling through tears. "Thank you so much, Dr. Wright," she was saying. "I was so nervous about coming to therapy, but this place, it feels safe. Like I can actually be honest. Here." Marcus caught my eye over the woman's shoulder, his face glowing with quiet pride. As Lisa helped schedule the next appointment, he joined us in the waiting room, either not noticing or choosing to ignore the tension between his mother and me. "That went incredibly well," he announced, straightening his collar. "Emma, she specifically mentioned how calming the space feels, said it's nothing like the cold clinical offices she'd been dreading." Victoria's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Darling, about that. We need to discuss the offer from Seattle Grace. Dr. Morrison called this morning and—" "No, Mother. Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. "We don't need to discuss it. I've already declined their offer. This is where I want to be, doing exactly what I'm doing." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went through a remarkable series of expressions before settling on cold fury. "I see," she said finally. "Well, I suppose I should leave you to your patience, though I hope you'll reconsider attending the hospital's winter gala. The right connections are still important, even if you're choosing this alternative path." After she left, Marcus slumped onto one of the waiting room couches, running his hands through his hair. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I should have known she'd try something like this." I sat beside him, taking his hand. "Hey, look at me. Your first patient just left here feeling heard and hopeful. That's what matters. That's what we built this for." He squeezed my hand, then reached into his pocket. "Speaking of building things, together." He pulled out a small box and my heart stopped. I was going to wait until tonight's reception, but after everything that just happened, "Emma Chen, will you marry me?" The ring was simple but elegant, a vintage Art Deco piece that spoke more of history and craft than ostentation. It was exactly what I would have chosen for myself, and nothing like the massive diamonds Victoria probably envisioned for her son's bride. "Yes," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "Yes. Absolutely yes." As Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger, we both knew that Victoria's reaction would be explosive. But in that moment, surrounded by the space we'd created together, her opposition felt distant and unimportant. We had built something real, a business, a relationship, a future, based on shared values and genuine love. What we didn't know was that Victoria Wright was already formulating her response, one that would test not just our love, but our very understanding of family, loyalty, and the true cost of following your heart. The engagement news spread like wildfire through our respective circles. My parents, despite their initial reservations about their daughter marrying a mind doctor, embraced Marcus with characteristic warmth. They insisted on hosting an engagement dinner at Lucky Dragon, closing the restaurant early to transform it into an intimate celebration space. Red paper lanterns cast a warm glow over the tables, while my mother prepared a feast that merged traditional Chinese engagement dishes with Marcus's favorite American comfort foods. When I first came to America, my father announced, raising his glass of baijiu, I thought success meant making money, having a big house. But now I know, success is finding someone who sees your soul, who helps you become better. He turned to Marcus, switching to carefully practiced English. "You make my Emma shine brighter. This is true success." Marcus, touched by my father's words, responded by giving a speech in the broken Mandarin he'd been secretly learning. His pronunciation was terrible, but the effort brought tears to my mother's eyes. The evening was perfect, until Victoria arrived, fashionably late and dramatically overdressed for our family restaurant. "I came straight from the hospital board meeting," she announced, eyeing the red lanterns with barely concealed disdain. "Though I must say this is all very ethnic. Marcus, darling, I thought we might also plan a proper engagement announcement at the country club." The warmth in the room seemed to evaporate. My sister May, never one to hold her tongue, smiled sweetly. "Oh, but Mrs. Wright, this is the proper announcement. See?" She gestured to the wall where my cousin, a professional photographer, had been quietly capturing candid shots of the celebration. "We've even got documentation of your fashionably late arrival." Victoria's smile could have frozen Seattle's summer. "How thorough. Though speaking of documentation, Marcus, there are some matters we should discuss. Perhaps somewhere more private?" Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. "Actually, Mother, anything you need to say can be said here. We're all family now." The word family seemed to physically pain Victoria. She reached into her designer handbag, pulling out a thick envelope. "Very well. I'd hoped to handle this more discreetly, But since you insist, she slid the envelope across the table. Your father's will had some very specific provisions regarding inheritance and marriage. Provisions that could affect your trust fund and your practice's financing. The restaurant fell silent. My father, who had been proudly showing Marcus's college friend the proper way to use chopsticks, set down his bijou. My mother paused in her distribution of lotus seed pastries. Even May stopped mid-eye roll. Marcus stared at the envelope without touching it. My father's will? The will that was settled 5 years ago when he passed? The one you said was straightforward and final? There were clauses, Victoria said delicately. Contingencies regarding suitable marriages and maintaining the family's social position. Your father was very concerned about fortune hunters, you see. I felt the blood drain from my face. Fortune hunters? Mrs. Wright, I have my own successful business. I've never asked Marcus for— Yes, your little design company, Victoria interrupted. How convenient that you secured such a large contract with my son's practice right before this engagement. Marcus stood so abruptly his chair clattered backward. That's enough, Mother. Emma designed my branding because she's the best in Seattle, and she did it at a discount despite my objections. She's never asked for a penny of right money. Victoria's expression softened into something almost pitying. Darling, that's exactly what a clever fortune hunter would do. Build trust, appear independent, then secure a position before showing their true intentions. She turned to me. No offense, dear. It's really quite skillfully done. My mother, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke in rapid-fire Cantonese. May, take your sister to the kitchen. Now. May grabbed my arm, but I resisted. No, I need to hear this. Mrs. Wright, I love your son. Not his money, not his status, him. The man who spends his Sundays helping elderly patients who can't afford therapy. The man who learns Mandarin just to make my parents smile. The man who chose a small practice in a diverse neighborhood over a prestigious hospital position. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Yes, all very noble. But nobility doesn't pay bills or maintain social standing. Marcus, darling, I'm simply trying to protect you. The will's provisions are clear. Marriage to someone outside our social circle could jeopardize your inheritance and the practice's financing. Then I'll find other financing, Marcus said firmly. I've already declined the trust fund disbursements since opening the practice. I don't need right money to help people. Don't be naive, Victoria snapped, her composed facade cracking. Your practice lease, your equipment, your malpractice insurance, all backed by family assets. Assets that could be withdrawn if you breach the will's conditions. The implications hung heavy in the air. Without the family's financial backing, Marcus's dream of providing accessible mental health care could crumble. He'd have to start over from scratch, possibly compromising his mission to help underserved communities. My father, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly stood. Mrs. Wright, he said, his accent thick with emotion. In China, we have saying, true gold fears no fire. If you test love with money, you burn both. He turned to Marcus and me. Your practice needs backing? Lucky Dragon has good credit. 20 years, never miss payment. We can help. Victoria looked aghast. You can't be serious. A takeout restaurant backing a medical practice? Not takeout, my mother corrected, her English precise and proud. Institution, featured in Food and Wine, and James Beard nomination this year. She straightened her apron. We know about building something from nothing. About choosing love over easy path. I felt tears streaming down my face as my parents stood together, offering to risk their life's work to support our dreams. Marcus gripped my hand, and I saw in his eyes the same certainty I felt in my heart. Victoria Wright could threaten us with financial ruin, but she couldn't touch what really mattered. Our love, our integrity, and the family we were building, not through money or status, but through genuine bonds of trust and understanding. What happened next would test that understanding in ways none of us could have predicted, as Victoria Wright revealed just how far she would go to maintain control over her son's life and how much she truly believed money could buy. The aftermath of the engagement dinner cast a long shadow over the holidays. While Marcus's practice continued to flourish, drawing clients from diverse communities across Seattle, Victoria's threats loomed over us like storm clouds. She began a subtle but relentless campaign, reaching out to Marcus's colleagues at medical conferences, suggesting his practice might be unstable. Anonymous reviews appeared online questioning his professional judgment. Equipment vendors suddenly became hesitant about payment plans. One particularly chilly January morning, I arrived at Marcus's office early, carrying a thermal bag full of my mother's famous congee. The waiting room was already half full, a testament to how quickly word had spread about his compassionate approach to therapy. Lisa, his office manager, intercepted me with a worried expression. "Emma, thank God you're here," she whispered, pulling me aside. "The credit card processor is down. They're claiming our account shows suspicious activity. And Dr. Wright? He's been on the phone with the insurance company all morning. Something about his malpractice coverage being under review." I found Marcus in his office, tie loosened, hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing in frustration. "Yes, I understand the policy requirements," he was saying, "but nothing has changed in my practice. The only difference is, no, I don't think my personal relationship status should affect my professional coverage rates." He caught sight of me, and his expression softened slightly. "I'll have my lawyer review the new terms. Thank you." He ended the call and slumped into his chair. "My mother's fingerprints are all over this. The insurance company's suddenly demanding a 300% increase in premiums. The equipment lease company's reviewing our contract. Even the cleaning service. Canceled." I set down the congee and moved behind him, massaging his tense shoulders. "We knew she'd try something like this, but you're building something real here, Marcus. Your patients love you. The community respects you." "Community respect doesn't pay bills," he interrupted, then immediately looked contrite. "I'm sorry, that sounded like her. I just never imagined she'd go this far. Did you know she called our landlord? Suggested I might be violating zoning laws by offering sliding scale payments." Before I could respond, Lisa knocked tentatively. "Dr. Wright, Mrs. Kaminsky is here for her appointment, and, a courier just delivered this." She handed Marcus a thick envelope bearing the logo of Seattle's most prestigious law firm. Marcus waited until Lisa left before opening it. As he read, his face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief. Finally, he handed me the documents, his hands shaking slightly. "She's petitioning for conservatorship," he said flatly, "claiming I'm mentally unfit to manage my own affairs due to recent erratic behavior and concerning personal choices. She's using my own profession against me, suggesting that my desire to offer affordable mental health care shows impaired judgment." I scanned the legal documents, fury building with each paragraph. Victoria had compiled a detailed case, twisting Marcus's every compassionate choice into evidence of instability. His decision to locate in a diverse neighborhood rather than affluent, Bellevue, poor business judgment, offering sliding scale payments, financial irresponsibility, getting engaged to me, proof of compromised decision-making. "This is insane," I breathed. "She can't possibly think a court would—" "She's got 3 psychiatrists willing to testify about concerning patterns," Marcus interrupted. "All colleagues of my father's, all deeply indebted to the Wright family's influence. And look at the judge assigned to the case." I checked the header and felt my stomach drop. "Judge Harrison, any relation to?" "My mother's college roommate," Marcus confirmed grimly. This isn't just about control anymore, Emma. She's trying to legally strip me of my autonomy. If she succeeds, she could force me to dissolve the practice, break the engagement, everything. Mrs. Kaminsky's muffled voice drifted through the door, asking Lisa if everything was all right. Marcus straightened his tie, visibly pulling himself together. I have patients who need me, he said. We'll figure this out later. Just promise me you won't give up on us, no matter what happens next. I kissed him softly. Never. But Marcus, maybe we should talk to my cousin Rachel. She's a civil rights attorney, specializes in fighting discriminatory conservatorships. This is exactly the kind of case Dr. Wright? Lisa again. Mrs. Kaminsky's getting anxious, and your next 3 appointments are already here. Marcus squeezed my hand. We'll talk tonight. I love you. As I left through the back door to avoid the waiting room, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Check your email, dear. Perhaps we can resolve this situation like reasonable adults. The fee email was already waiting, a proposed settlement that made my blood boil. Victoria would withdraw the conservatorship petition if I signed an agreement ending my relationship with Marcus and relocating my business out of state. In return, she'd pay me a consultation fee of $500,000 for my work on the practice's branding. She was trying to buy me off, to reduce our love to a simple business transaction. The amount was life-changing, enough to expand my business nationally, to help my parents renovate Lucky Dragon, to secure my family's future. But it came with a price tag I could never accept. Marcus's freedom to choose his own path. As I walked home through Seattle's winter drizzle, I drafted and deleted a dozen responses to Victoria. Finally, I settled on sending her the same thing I'd recently designed for a pro bono client, a domestic violence shelter's empowerment brochure about recognizing and escaping controlling relationships. My phone rang almost immediately. Victoria's voice was arctic. I'm trying to help you both save face. Don't turn this into a war you can't win. With all due respect, Mrs. Wright, I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. You started this war the moment you decided your son's happiness was worth less than your social status. I'm just deciding to fight back. I ended the call and immediately dialed my cousin Rachel. As the phone rang, I thought about Marcus's patients, the immigrant mothers, the struggling students, the elderly couples who'd found hope in his practice. I thought about my parents, who'd built something beautiful from nothing but love and determination. I thought about Marcus, who chose compassion over comfort every single day. Victoria Wright might have money and influence on her side, but we had something stronger. A community of people who believed in building bridges rather than walls. And I was done letting her demolish the foundations of our future. My cousin Rachel's office was a complete contrast to the sleek corporate law firms Victoria favored. Located in a converted warehouse in Pioneer Square, the space buzzed with the energy of young activists and community organizers. Protest posters and civil rights artwork covered the exposed brick walls, while paralegals huddled over case files at communal tables. Let me get this straight, Rachel said, spreading Victoria's legal documents across her desk. Your future mother-in-law is trying to declare your fiancé, a licensed psychiatrist who runs a successful practice, mentally incompetent because he's choosing to help underserved communities and marry someone who isn't a socialite? Marcus nodded grimly. And she's got 3 prominent psychiatrists ready to testify that my choices demonstrate impaired judgment. One of them was my father's best friend. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she read through the petition. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Klein, and Dr. Whitman. Interesting. Tell me, these doctors, they all have privileges at Seattle Grace Hospital? Yes, Marcus confirmed. Mother's on the board there. Why? A slow smile spread across Rachel's face. Because I just finished a class action lawsuit against Seattle Grace for discriminatory admission practices. We found some very interesting patterns in their mental health unit, specifically how they handle cases involving minorities and low-income patients. She pulled out her laptop, typing rapidly. Those same doctors wrote evaluations questioning the mental competency of 2 other physicians who tried to open practices in underserved areas. Both cases were quietly settled when the doctors agreed to join Seattle Grace instead. I felt a surge of hope. So, this isn't just about Marcus? It's a pattern? A pattern of using conservatorship threats to maintain control over doctors who challenge the status quo, Rachel confirmed. The question is, are you both ready for what fighting this might mean? Going public could hurt your mother's reputation, Marcus. Marcus reached for my hand. She's already hurting people by blocking access to mental health care. Maybe it's time someone stood up to her. Rachel nodded approvingly. Good, because I've got another card to play. She pulled out a thick file. Remember that sliding scale payment system you implemented? I had my team analyze your patient data, anonymized, of course. In 6 months, you've provided mental health services to more people of color and low-income families than Seattle Grace has in the past 3 years. That's why I opened my own practice, Marcus said quietly. Traditional hospitals aren't serving these communities. Exactly. So when Victoria's doctors testify that your business model shows poor judgment, we can demonstrate that you're actually addressing a critical healthcare gap, one that their own institution has consistently failed to serve. As Rachel outlined our legal strategy, my phone buzzed with a text from May. Turn on Channel 7 now. Rachel found the news station on her computer. Victoria's perfectly composed. Face filled the screen as she stood outside Seattle Grace Hospital. As a mother and a member of this community, she was saying, I'm deeply concerned about the growing trend of medical professionals abandoning established institutions for unproven alternative practices. When doctors prioritize social experiments over sound medical judgment. Marcus made a strangled sound. She's really doing this. She's trying to destroy everything I've built. No, Rachel said firmly. She's giving us exactly what we need, proof that this isn't about your mental competency. It's about maintaining control over healthcare access. She turned to her team, who had gathered around the computer. I want everything on Seattle Grace's mental health unit. Admission records, payment policies, demographic data. And get me in touch with those other doctors they threatened. It's time to show Victoria right that she picked the wrong fight. As Rachel's office sprang into action, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother, sending a photo of the line stretching outside Lucky Dragon. Community heard about Victoria's news interview, her message read. They come to show support. Many are Marcus's patients. The photo brought tears to my eyes. The line included elderly Chinese grandmothers, young tech workers, hijab-wearing mothers with children, the diverse tapestry of Seattle that Marcus's practice served. They were holding handmade signs. Dr. Wright saved my life, and mental health has no tax bracket and love money. Marcus saw the photo and his shoulders straightened. Rachel, what do you need from me? First, we file our response to the conservatorship petition, not just denying her claims but countersuing for discriminatory practices. Then we hold a press conference of our own, not at a hospital, but at your office, surrounded by the community you serve. She turned to me. Emma, we'll need to move fast. Can you help us put together a visual presentation of Marcus's impact? Something showing the real human cost of limiting mental health care access? Already on it, I said, pulling out my tablet. I've been documenting patient success stories, anonymously of course, since the practice opened. And I've got data visualizations showing the healthcare gaps in different Seattle neighborhoods. As we worked into the evening, more texts arrived. The local NAACP chapter offered their support. A healthcare advocacy group wanted to highlight Marcus's practice as a model for accessible care. Even some of Seattle Grace's own staff reached out privately, sharing stories of patients they'd had to turn away due to financial constraints. See? Rachel said, gesturing at the growing pile of evidence. Victoria thought she could isolate you, make this seem like a personal family matter. Instead, she's exposed a systemic problem, one that people are ready to fight. Marcus looked at the photo of the crowd outside Lucky Dragon again, then at me. I've spent so long trying to please her, trying to prove I could succeed on her terms. But this, he gestured at Rachel's office, at the community support, at our growing resistance. This is real success. I squeezed his hand. And we're just getting started. Rachel closed her laptop with a decisive click. Tomorrow, we file our response. Victoria Wright thinks she's protecting her family's legacy? Let's show her what legacy really means. It's not about maintaining power. It's about using that power to lift others up. As we left Rachel's office that night, the Seattle sky had cleared, revealing a canopy of stars. Marcus stopped on the sidewalk, pulling me close. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me, for fighting with me, for showing me that family is something you build, not something you inherit." I looked up at him, this man who'd chosen love over privilege, service over status, courage over comfort. "Always," I promised. "Now let's go show your mother what real wealth looks like." What we didn't know then was that Victoria Wright had one more card to play. One that would test not just our love, but the very foundations of everything Marcus thought he knew about his family's legacy. The morning of our press conference dawned with typical Seattle mist, but the crowd gathering outside Marcus's practice brought their own warmth. Community members arrived early, sharing thermoses of coffee and homemade signs. My parents set up a table with hot congee and steamed buns, while May coordinated with local news crews. The energy was electric, a grassroots movement born from one family's attempt to silence a voice of change. Inside, Marcus paced his office, reviewing his statement one last time. He'd insisted on wearing his everyday work clothes rather than a formal suit, wanting to present himself exactly as his patients saw him. "I won't let her make me ashamed of who I've chosen to be," he'd said that morning. Rachel burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "You need to see this," she said, thrusting a folder into Marcus's hands. "My team found it in the county archives last night." As Marcus read, his face went pale. "This can't be right. There must be some mistake." I moved to his side, reading over his shoulder. The document was dated 20 years ago, a whistleblower complaint filed against Wright Industries by none other than Marcus's father, Richard Wright. In it, he detailed how the company had deliberately inflated mental health care costs at their affiliated hospitals, making treatment inaccessible to lower-income patients. "There's more," Rachel said softly. "The complaint was suddenly withdrawn, and 2 weeks later, your father was appointed to the hospital board. The same position your mother now holds." Marcus sank into his chair, the papers trembling in his hands. All those times she talked about preserving his legacy. She was protecting a system he tried to expose. Did he regret backing down? "I think," Rachel said carefully, "we might have found the real reason your father included those trust fund conditions, not to prevent fortune hunters, but to ensure the next generation would have the courage to finish what he started." Before Marcus could respond, Lisa knocked urgently. "Dr. Wright? Mrs. Wright is here. She's demanding to speak with you before the press conference." Victoria swept in without waiting for a response, immaculate in a designer suit that probably cost more than 3 months of therapy sessions. She stopped short at the sight of the documents in Marcus's hands. "Where did you get those?" she demanded, her composure cracking slightly. Marcus stood slowly. "Did you know, Mother? When Dad filed this complaint, did you know what he was trying to do?" Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Your father was having a moment of weakness. I helped him see reason, helped him understand that some systems shouldn't be dismantled just because they're imperfect." "You mean you helped him choose money over morality?" Marcus said quietly. "Just like you're trying to do with me." I'm trying to protect you. Victoria's voice rose. Do you have any idea what would happen if this got out? The lawsuits, the investigations, everything your father built, everything we preserved for you. Everything you preserved was built on keeping healthcare away from people who need it most, I interjected. That's not preservation, Mrs. Wright. That's perpetuating harm. Victoria turned on me, eyes blazing. This all started with you. If you'd just taken the money, if you'd just what, Mother? Marcus stepped between us. Just helped you bury another attempt to expose the truth? Just walked away from love to protect profit margins? Love? Victoria spat the word like poison. You think this girl loves you? She's turned you against your own family, your own legacy. No, Marcus's voice was steel. She helped me understand what legacy really means. Dad knew it too, 20 years ago, before you convinced him to stay quiet. But I won't make the same choice. He gathered the documents and moved toward the door. Victoria grabbed his arm. If you do this, if you expose this, you'll destroy everything. Is that what you want? To tear down your own family's name? Marcus gently removed her hand. Family isn't about names or reputations, Mother. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Through the window, we could hear the crowd growing larger, their voices rising in support. Rachel stepped forward, holding out a USB drive. These are copies of everything we found. The complaint, the financial records, the pattern of discriminatory practices. Your choice, Marcus. We can go out there and just fight the conservatorship, or we can fight for real change. Marcus took the drive, then reached for my hand. Dad tried to fix this 20 years ago. He couldn't finish it, but maybe that's why he made sure I'd have the choice to try again. He turned to his mother. You can stand with us. Help make this right. Or you can stand against us. But you can't stop us. Victoria's face was a mask of fury and fear. You'll regret this, both of you. When the dust settles, when you see what you've destroyed. The only thing being destroyed, Rachel interrupted, is a system that profits from people's pain. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a press conference to attend. As we walked toward the front door, Victoria called out one last time. Marcus, please, I'm your mother. Marcus paused, his hand on the doorknob. Yes, you are. And I love you. But Dad taught me that love sometimes means standing up to the people we care about when they're wrong. I'm sorry you forgot that lesson. We stepped outside into a sea of supporters. As Marcus moved to the microphone, still holding my hand, I saw not just the man I loved, but a legacy reborn. Not in wealth or status, but in the courage to choose right over easy, truth over comfort, community over profit. Victoria Wright had tried to put a price tag on love, but she'd forgotten that some things are truly priceless. Integrity, purpose, and the strength to stand up for what you believe in, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. As Marcus began to speak, sharing not just his story but his father's untold fight for justice, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on to what we have, but being brave enough to risk it all for what's right. The aftermath of our press conference reverberated through Seattle like ripples in a still pond. Major news outlets picked up the story, not just of a mother's attempt to control her son through legal manipulation, but of a decades-long system of healthcare inequality finally exposed to sunlight. The headline in the Seattle Times read, Wright, Legacy, From Profit to Purpose, a son finishes father's fight. Victoria disappeared to the family's vacation home in the Hamptons, but her absence spoke louder than any statement she could have made. The hospital board called an emergency meeting, and within weeks, Seattle Grace announced a complete overhaul of their mental health services, including a new sliding scale payment system suspiciously similar to Marcus's model. Anonymous sources suggested that several board members, including Victoria, had been asked to resign. Marcus's practice flourished, becoming a blueprint for accessible mental health care. Other psychiatrists reached out, seeking guidance on implementing similar models in their own communities. The waiting room was always full, but not just with patients. Medical students now observed his practice, learning that success could be measured in lives changed rather than dollars earned. One rainy evening, as we closed up the office, Lisa handed Marcus a letter that had arrived by courier. The return address was from the Hamptons. Marcus stared at it for a long moment before opening it, his hands steady but his face tense. "She's selling the mansion," he said finally, scanning the pages. "And she's creating a foundation, the Richard Wright Mental Health Access Fund. She wants me to be on the board." He looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "She says Dad would be proud of me." I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the weight of generational healing in that simple letter. "Will you do it?" "I think I have to," he replied softly. "Not for her, but for him, and for everyone else still fighting to be heard." Our wedding was nothing like the grand society affair Victoria had once envisioned. We held it in the courtyard of Lucky Dragon, strung with red lanterns and fairy lights. Marcus's patients, now more family than clients, filled the space alongside my relatives. My father insisted on cooking himself, creating a feast that merged cultures and traditions, just as our love had bridged worlds. Victoria didn't attend, but she sent a gift, Richard's original whistleblower complaint, framed alongside a news clipping about Marcus's successful fight for healthcare reform. The note attached read simply, "Some legacies are worth more than gold. I'm learning that from both my boys." As we danced under the stars, surrounded by the community we'd built together, Marcus whispered, "You know, when Mother first tried to buy you off, I was terrified you might actually consider it. $500,000 is life-changing money." I laughed, remembering that moment that now felt like a lifetime ago. "Would you believe me if I told you I was never even tempted? Some things really are priceless." "Like what?" he teased, spinning me gently. "Like watching elderly Mrs. Chen finally get therapy for her decades of untreated depression. Like seeing college students afford the help they need without going into debt. Like knowing that somewhere out there, your father is smiling down on the son who finished his fight." Marcus pulled me closer, and in his embrace I felt the truth we'd discovered through all of this, that real wealth isn't counted in dollars and cents, but in lives touched, barriers broken, and love that's strong enough to stand up for what's right. 2 years later, I sat in Marcus's office, watching him rock our newborn daughter as he conducted a therapy session over video chat with a young immigrant mother. On his desk, next to a photo of us on our wedding day, sat Victoria's latest letter. She'd been making progress in therapy herself, slowly learning to measure success in smiles rather than status. The Richard Wright Mental Health Access Fund had already helped establish 5 new community mental health centers across Seattle, each one operating on Marcus's model of accessible care. My design firm had grown too, specializing in healthcare branding that emphasized inclusion and dignity. Even Lucky Dragon had expanded, with my parents opening a second location that included a community gathering space for mental health support groups. As I watched Marcus end his session, gently bouncing our daughter who we'd named Rachel Victoria Wright, Rachel after the cousin who helped us fight for justice, Victoria not for her grandmother's past, but for her potential future. I thought about the true cost of standing up for what you believe in. We'd risked everything. Marcus's inheritance, his practice, his family relationships. But what we'd gained was worth infinitely more than what we'd almost lost. We'd helped change a broken system, inspired others to fight for accessible health care, and proved that love, when anchored in purpose and principle, can transform not just 2 lives, but entire communities. Victoria had tried to put a price tag on our love story, but in doing so, she'd inadvertently helped us discover its true value, not in the wealth we might have had, but in the change we manage to create together. Sometimes, I realized, the greatest fortune isn't what we inherit, but what we choose to build with our own hands, our own hearts, and our unwavering commitment to what's right. As Marcus laid our sleeping daughter in her bassinet and pulled me into a tender kiss, I knew that some debts can never be paid with money. They can only be honored through living truthfully, loving deeply, and standing firmly for what you believe in, no matter the cost. Because in the end, the most valuable legacy isn't the one we inherit, but the one we choose to create. And that, as it turns out, is something truly priceless. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.